My name is Lisa Spears. And I know you're all very tired. I'm the last speaker of the day, so I'm grateful to have everyone's attention, and I hope you will remember something that I say. The reason I asked them to bring in this whiteboard is that originally I prepared a PowerPoint, which I have on my phone, and then I was informed there would not be visual aids, but there is one thing I need to demonstrate on the board. So let me begin by saying what exactly is thought reform. You may have heard it referred to as coercive persuasion or brainwashing or mind control. And essentially what it is in a closed environment, it's an intention to coercively change a person's beliefs, ideas, identities, religious affiliation, sexual orientation, anything that is seen as deviant or problematic for the regime that's controlling the country. And the reason that I talk about my own experience is because I think sometimes, if any of you in this room saw me walking down the street, you probably wouldn't think that I've been in a detention camp, right? And when I was 17 years old and I was being waterboarded, I didn't think it's cool because someday I'm going to write my PhD about this. Okay, people usually laugh when I say that. That's okay. It's not funny if you haven't been through it, I guess, but it's funny to me. Anyway, so the thing I want to start with on the board here. So in the 1960s, there was a Polish-American researcher named Solomon Asch who studied group behavior. And I am not a biologist, I am not a neuroscientist, I am a social scientist. So I don't study what actually happens in our DNA. But we have a lot of theories in the social science community that a lot of our behavior is based on the things that helped us survive when we were cavemen. So when we were cavemen, the single most important factor to survival was belonging to a group. So he brought these people in to study them. And what he did was he drew 4 lines on the board, which I'm about to draw, and he asked people, if we look at this line here, which of these 3 lines is the same length as this one? Okay. Show of hands.
The first one and the second. The first one and the last one.
Does everyone agree with the gentleman?
Yes.
Okay. So in this experiment, there was a panel of 4 respondents, and the first 3 were part of the experiment, and they would say that this line was the correct answer. And only the 4th participant was actually being observed. And in 75% of cases, the participant would give the wrong answer. They would say it's this line, when you can very, very clearly see that it's this line. And these were not children, these were not people under duress, these were not people who even knew each other, these were complete strangers, but they were so afraid of going against the rest of the group that they disbelieved their own eyes. And this is how thought reform works. This is how mind control works. So in the 1960s, there were a couple people who studied this phenomenon. The big one, was Robert J. Lifton and Edgar Schein, who coined the term coercive persuasion. And both of those guys, they were guys, were Americans. I try to keep a healthy criticism of my own cultural bias. I'm a US national. Most social scientists that have studied this are white guys from the US, so I try to keep that in mind. But they studied American POWs in China. And they looked at these very specific methods that were used. Things like you're not allowed to talk about certain things. You're not allowed to read certain materials. You're not allowed to listen to certain music. You have to use this coded language, loaded language, so they would give you specific terms. We don't eat breakfast. We meet in the mess hall. They would use this language that they couldn't use once they left the prisoner of war camp. And they were really severely punished, not just for what they did or what they said, but for what they believed and thought. So they had to convince their captors that they really believed these things they were being told to believe, that they did not feel loyal to the US anymore, that they did not agree with a certain religion or whatever. And after that, after Edgar Schein, after Lifton, there was Irving Goffman, and I think the real godfather of thought reform is actually Michael Foucault, because he looked at the way that prison systems changed from we're going to focus on physical punishment to what he called spiritual or psychological punishment. And that originally that was seen as a maybe more ethical or kinder, softer approach, but in a lot of ways it was actually a lot darker because of this, because it eroded people's identity. So the reason that I talk about this in the context of the topic of this conference, which is peace and democracy, is like, you know, I am a US national. I don't know if you can tell from my voice, but my education has mainly been in Europe, but my cultural bias is definitely from the US. And in the US, sometimes it's considered controversial to say that thought is a human right, that identity is a human right. And especially, you know, the place that I was in, it was not considered that. It's not really on the books. But international law actually is very, very explicitly clear that religious affiliation, the right to expression, the right to, protest, the right to associate with certain groups is a very, very fundamental part of human rights and international law. But unfortunately, we've seen a really colossal failure of the ability to enforce international law over the years. And I could give recent examples, but I could give recent examples going back decades of how international law can be quite impotent at times, and how the worst countries are often the ones that refuse to participate in it. And like the USA, for example, has never actually ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which says like we can't be put into prisons unless we've committed a crime. So how this is relevant to fascism? The main way, okay, there are many ways that fascists employ this, but I'm going to show you one. And this is the stratification of society. So here we have the leaders. And in a cultic government, in a cult of personality or an authoritarian regime where one person or one group or one ideology or even the country itself is seen as the ultimate thing, the thing that we worship, it's deified, it's reverent, right? It's above criticism. Then we have what's essentially the middle class, although it includes a lot more people. And underneath we have minorities. So the goal, when the leader speaks out against minorities and makes people in this group feel afraid to be a part of this group, the goal is not this group. The goal is this group. So the people who are essentially carrying out thought reform, saying, I'm not queer, whatever, like saying I'm going to speak out against sexual minorities. Like, the goal is not to get people within, I'm using sexual minorities as an example because it's a very popular scapegoat group and I happen to be part of it. The goal is not to get people who are part of sexual minorities to say, oh, you're right, I'm a bad person, I'm responsible for society's ails. It's to get people in this group to say, oh, these are the bad guys, these are the people who are responsible for our problems, so they don't look here. And the reason I mention that is because I was asked to speak a little bit about how we can combat thought reform and mind control. And I talk about this a lot, I deal with this a lot, I work for an NGO, and I'm also in the final year of my PhD, and I get asked that question a lot. I think the most important thing for those of us who are not living under such groups need to keep in mind is that these people are also not really to blame. I mean, you could argue that they are, but like, I want to look at this guy, and these people are definitely not to blame either. So like, for example, there's a lot of talk about economic sanctions. I'm not a big fan of economic sanctions, first of all, because a lot of people die under them. But the other reason is that when you grow up in a country like this, in a society like this, you are told your whole life, everybody hates us, these people are the enemy, and the preservation of your country, of your society, is the most important goal in your life. So if I come along and I say, okay, well, you know what, they're right, I do hate you, I do hate your country, I do hate your government, and no more food, no more education, like that's just going to reinforce the idea that the leader is the only one who's going to save them, the only one who's going to give them money, food, education, medicine, whatever. The other reason is that it's punishing a group of people who are already being punished. And so I'm really not a fan of that. So the question is then, what do we do? So I have many papers that I've written about this, so I'm like, I have not very much time. I will try to talk as much as I can about what can actually be done. So I will say that I believe the biggest antidote to thought reform is information and education. And social media gets a really bad rap these days, but the internet is a very powerful source of connecting people who live under authoritarian regimes. Even where internet is banned, okay, we use VPNs, whatever. And it's important for us to try and make as much information available to people as possible and to not isolate people who are already very, very isolated. So my goal, and I work with a lot of people, in the NGO that I work with a lot of people who are either leaving cults or are leaving authoritarian regimes. And a lot of the time what happens is they come to me or other people that I work with and they say, okay, so what is the right thing to do? Or, okay, so if he's not, if he really didn't have my best interest, then you must have my best interest. And the goal of any intervention or any, deprogramming is not to get someone to agree with me. It's to empower them to think for themselves. What do you think is right or wrong? Who do you think should be leading you? What kind of system of government do you believe in? And that's my goal in an intervention, is to say, like, I can't tell you if you're queer or not. That's up to you to decide. I can't tell you how to, how to live your life, what you want to do, what is important to you, what's not important to you, what you think is right or wrong, what's the goal of your own life. You have to decide that for yourself. So that's how I try to help people who have left. The people who are currently trapped are a lot harder to deal with. And my organization, actually, over the years, we've done a few campaigns where we've actually quite literally done aerial drops of information leaflets. I don't know if I think that was a good thing or not, but like I said, information and trying to keep a conversation and a dialogue going so people are not more isolated than they already are. One of the questions I get asked a lot is, aren't you afraid people are going to use your research to become dictators? And I understand that question, but like nobody would come to the magic show if they knew how the trick was done. If they could see that the rabbit was in the hat the whole time, no one would pay for the show. So if we can expose the methods that are being used and the way that people are being manipulated, I think that's the best antidote we have to it. And I think it's really important to retain a healthy dose of self-criticism towards, that's why I mentioned my own biases, towards our own government, towards our own concentric circles. Probably if you're doing a master's in international relations, then you're already pretty critical of your own government, but to be critical of your own social movements, of your own political parties, whatever it is, your own internal biases, and to really ask, is this really what I believe, or is it what I've been told to believe? Is this what I really want, or what I really think is the right thing to do, or could there be something else? Is this just what I've always felt pressured to do my whole life? So I think that's all I'm going to share, and then I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Lisa. We are perfectly on time, and I just learned that if we would be an album, we would have a bonus track today. But before we introduce the additional speaker, let's give you a chance to ask Lisa questions. Anyone?
Good evening, Ms. Pierce. Thank you for the speech. My name is Sandeep. I come from India. My question is, how do you view the role of social media and the increasing access to technology that we have in this modern world, where authoritarian regimes are then exploiting this technology to propagate their own ideas, ideologies, and then to crush dissent further? To give you an example from the country that I come from, the government in power has been using WhatsApp as their most potent weapon against our largest religious minority, the Muslims. It's not my place to talk from their point of oppression, but as a neutral viewer of the entire scenario, and as somebody that happens to have a name that guards him from this oppression, I still find it extremely difficult back in my own country to be so critical and talk publicly about what the government has been doing. So how do you see the role of social media in the way that governments are using it to then control minds and to basically crush dissent? Thank you.
I mean, huge question, and I heard two different questions in that, because I was speaking and I essentially researched from the perspective of someone who is not living in such a society. But you were asking me, I think, more from the perspective of someone who is, correct?
That's correct.
And you're right, and it's actually quite frightening, and I think about this, and I talk about this a lot, that social media can, and the internet in general, can be used for good or evil, essentially. But because it's such a powerful tool for information, it's also a very powerful tool for manipulation and control. And unfortunately, I think most of the manipulation and control that's being used in social media at the time is really driven by money. I think that's the main goal, but yeah, of course, authoritarian regimes can also use it. I mean, I don't have a solution to that problem, but I know what some people do is they use alternative platforms. Like in the US, everyone is switching to Signal instead of using WhatsApp. But of course, you know, the government can then use that platform and stuff. And you know, if you build it, they will come, right? Like that's kind of the issue. So yeah, this is why I try to say I don't want to blame the people for what's happening. I want to blame the government. And I mean, okay, to put it very simplistically, of course, it's more complicated than that. So I think our job as people who, for example, are not in India is to make sure that we are standing in solidarity with the people of India, especially minorities, especially religious minorities. And if we can find a way to have a platform to discuss and share information that is not currently being controlled, even if it will be in the future, and to keep moving one step ahead of the regime, that's the best thing that we can do.
Thank you, Lisa. More questions? Yes, please.
Hello, I'm also from the US, and I do have to admit, you know, your speech it's quite frightening and quite Orwellian, unfortunately, you know, this idea of groupthink and everything. I myself have experienced this as well, growing up in a cult-like environment, a very religious environment, and I remember it was very jarring to come out of that environment and realize that my entire world was completely flipped on its head, and most of what I had been taught was essentially a lie or untrue. And so my question is, I know you touched on this very briefly, but if you could elaborate, the process of rehabilitation for these people who have gone through such traumatic experiences, whether it be in a cult-like setting or in an entire authoritarian regime, how do you go about giving them the confidence to build themselves up to critically think and think for themselves and not continue to just sheepishly follow the next leader that they come across? Thank you.
Again, huge question, and congratulations that you left. I'm very happy to hear that. So I do sort of a 5-pronged approach. The first is education. To me, that's the very beginning, is education. And as much as you can, distancing yourself from the group. That's not always possible if, for example, your entire family is in the group. Or, yeah, whatever. I mean, your children are in the group. I hear that a lot. But if you can, as much distance yourself. The next is community. If you can find other people who have left, they're going to understand your experience in a unique way. And a lot of the time, you know, as you said, people don't realize what they went through or that it was wrong or problematic until they hear someone else talking about it, and then it makes something click in their head. So this is why community is important. Telling your story. I encourage people to tell their story as much as they feel comfortable. Like maybe they don't want to post on Facebook about what they went through. I mean, some people do, and that's great. But even just to share, like, with a close friend, or even a stranger, I don't know, or a religious confessor or whatever. And then, of course, I encourage people to seek professional help, because I am not actually a therapist. Yeah. Anyone else?
Hello, my name is Noor Al-Khafaji. I'm from the United States. My question to you is, in a time of information warfare, especially when these, for example, the third world countries or the oppressed or these people that are dealing with ethnic problems, ethnic cleansing, or whatever the case might be, how can you approach them in a way that, yes, they can trust the person that's giving them this information, but also they won't doubt that the person that is giving them the information, whether it's someone from the United States or where, so like how can they make that differentiation of, yes, maybe these people have hurt me in the past, but how can I open up and be able to trust them in a time of information warfare when indeed the country that is being oppressed knows the truth and the people on the outside are stirring the scenario or changing up the story and serving that to them, if that makes sense. Thank you.
I'm sorry, are you talking about a specific case?
Yes.
Yeah.
For example, yes, the Palestinian.
Yes.
Yes.
That's what I thought you were talking about. So this is definitely an issue that I see with defectors or people who have escaped. And so that's why I say, like, for example, if we use that specific case study, the Palestinian people are not the target of thought reform. They're the human shields, essentially, for thought reform. So, but yeah, like I said, this is a huge problem I see, is that defectors leave and then they are treated even worse when they get to the country where they're seeking refuge. And because, again, easy target. So I find that people are quite empowered by expat communities, by finding other people who have experienced what they have. I think people are very empowered a lot of the times by dedicating themselves to the cause, to their own cause, to fighting for their people, whatever, for their rights and all of these things. But of course, this is always going to be a problem, and it's also something that I feel very passionately about and that I've done a lot of work on, and it's hard for me not to get emotional when I talk about it, but I'm doing my best not to get emotional at the moment. And I think, like, my job as someone who looks like this, you know, is to try and educate other people, and especially people in the US, people in Europe, Germans. I'm sorry, I was educated in Germany, so I definitely have a slight German bias towards things. My job is to be the person, because I have nothing to lose. For example, by standing up for, you know, what I believe in, I have nothing to lose. I mean, and so it's my job to essentially be on the front lines and to educate Europeans and people in the US that we should not blame people who have survived ethnic cleansing, people who are refugees, for our societal problems, and to try and use my platform to advocate for them. But I think your question was about the refugees themselves, and I'm like, I don't really have an answer to that question except to listen to other Palestinians. Like, that would be my best advice. I don't know if that answered the question.
Hello and good afternoon. This is Zarifa Karimi. As we know, behavior changes or brainwashing is not something which could happen overnight. Based on your finding, if the people or the community gone through this process, is it possible to reverse, or if possible, what are the ways to reverse this behavior change or brainwash, especially when it is deeply connected with religious beliefs? Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. And I would encourage you to look at the work of the sociologist Bruno Bettelheim, who actually became a cult leader himself later in his life, which is another story for another conference. But you know, he was in Dachau, and he was in another concentration camp. And he observed the transitional behavior of the inmates, the detainees who were in concentration camps. That at first they were very angry that they were there, and they fought against the guards, and they would not adjust to being there. But then as some time went by, there was this second phase where they adjusted to being there, and they accepted their reality, whatever, and then they just basically did whatever the guards told them to do. But then in the third phase, actually most detainees would begin to identify with the Gestapo. So when we look at these, I'm addressing the first part of your comment, which was that this happens over time. So deprogramming, yes, also happens over time. And, you know, as I said to, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, the person from the US, the other, as I said to Grace, like, I suggest, first of all, leaving as much as you can, distancing yourself as much as you can. exposure to other ways of thinking. Like, this is a very international room, and people who study international relations usually, sometimes they grew up in multiple countries or they have parents from different countries, but like most people don't have exposure to different cultures. But regarding your second point about it being inculcated by religious beliefs, this was your second point. I really encourage people to ask themselves what they actually believe. So like, I work with a lot of people who are leaving religious cults, and one of the things I hear from pretty much everyone is, I still believe XYZ. Like, I still believe in the idea of a loving God who's always rooting for me, or something like that. And I say, like, I am not here to tell you not to believe in God or to believe in a loving God or a punishing God. I have no dog in that fight. That is up to you to decide. You are allowed to decide for yourself what you believe, including religious beliefs. You are allowed to say, I want to be a part of this religious group, but I also don't agree with the idea that he gets to tell me exactly how I must listen to God. I get to decide for myself how to listen to God, and I don't necessarily have to tell anybody else that they should believe this, or say, like, if you don't believe this, we're not going to let you be a part of our group and you're going to suffer greatly. Does that answer your question?
Another question or comment?
Real quick, I'm sorry, I know I already asked a question, but one just popped into my head again. You mentioned cults, and I would just, my question is, how would you define a cult or an organization that has cultic tendencies? What are kind of the points or the characteristics so that someone can instantly recognize an institution like that?
So I can't answer that question with the time limit that I have. I have many criteria that I use to evaluate whether or not an organization is a cult, but I get asked a lot, but isn't all religion a cult? Don't you think every government is authoritarian? And I think the short answer is no. There are a few quick and dirty criteria I can list. One is that there's a central leader who is above criticism, always. And that could be a central doctrine. It could be nationalism itself, the state itself. Like we saw that, in East Germany, right? The second is there is a goal of power, domination, and money. Like every cult wants money. And they will ask you to give an insane amount of money, and they'll tell you to do all kinds of things. Third is that you will be told that this group and this group alone holds the keys to the kingdom, right? Like what I said earlier about believing in God, I don't have a monopoly on that. So cults will come along and say, hey, you've struggled with this your whole life, right? You felt lost and alone and whatever it is that every human being feels, but we have a very simple solution to that problem. If you just do X, Y, Z and you come with us, then you won't feel that way anymore. And we are the only ones who will make you feel not that way anymore. This isn't something you could do on your own. Like, we are the only ones who can save you. Usually in later stages, cults really start behaving very, very erratically. Like Synanon, the big cult of the 1960s, tried to assassinate the journalists who spoke out against it. Most cults eventually do chemical castrations. And those are much more extreme, and I think it's important to look at these more subtle ways of looking at things. And the final thing, I would say this is the absolute, is it a cult or is it just a religion, is how easy is it to leave. If it's a cult, it's very difficult to leave. If it's a religion, then I'm going to say it's your choice whether or not you believe what I'm telling you. If it's a cult, then you will be cut off. You will be called an enemy. We will try to stifle you. We will come after you. We will spy on you. You will regret it if you try to leave. And also you will suffer and you'll go back to feeling lost and maybe you'll die. In some cases, people are told that.
Hello, my name is Tayyiba. I am from Pakistan. So I have a question which just comes, like, it came into my mind, and I just want to ask it, that you have talked about personal biases, right? So I want to ask that we know some things like, okay, the previous generation of ours were not so educated, maybe not so good with the technology, but we are born with technology and we have access to every portal, every channel, every information of history, past, present. So as it is easier to get manipulated, it is also very easier to find out the truth or to search for something if we want. But still, in our lives or in sometimes, or personal biases or societal pressures or the things which are surrounding us are more important than the truth we have seen with our own eyes. So even if we are seeing something which is truthful to us, which we find that, yeah, it is the reality, but still we cannot accept it, and we cannot openly say it because we are so societally pressurized, or we have been believing in certain things in the past. So we cannot change our beliefs. So why a person feels so rigid in his or her own mind and her own biases that he cannot come out of it after seeing the truth with our own bare eyes? So I just want to know that how can we overcome that rigidness, and how can we become more open to certain realities which are unfolding in front of our eyes nowadays in the times of technology. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. And as I said at the beginning, I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm not a biologist, so I haven't looked at, exactly what's happening in our brains during these processes, but I've studied it from a sociological perspective. And people start to let go when they feel that they're safe. So there have been experiments, for example, on the concept of how people behave when it comes to uncertainty. And there was one experiment where two groups were put into two different rooms and they were told to solve a problem. And one of the groups was in silence and the other one had this noise in the background, this eh. So the group who had this noise in the background solved the problem much faster. And this is something that we see a lot when people are in natural disasters, when people are experiencing, extreme violence, that they're much more likely to be inflexible and to have a stake in certainty. And the concept of uncertainty feels very threatening to our survival as human beings. So I think the best thing that we can do, like when people start to let go of their rigidness and to be open to uncertainty, is when they believe that they are safe. So if we can help people to feel that they are safe, that they can say, hey, you know what, actually I don't know if I believe in this, and they won't be thrown out of the room or they won't be met with violence or whatever, like that's when, people are able to express dissent.
I have an observation to share. In a couple of presentations and also in the way we discussed things, I have the impression that we mix up tools with means or with goals. Like in the Thailand presentation, it was about what power and might could do. And we talked about technology, that you can use it wisely and then you find the truth. And one of the comments on education is the key, and it helps us because this is an educational institution and it's good as such. I think this is a misunderstanding if we include something like a normative bias on certain means. Because you can do terrible things with education, and you can do terrible things with tech, and you certainly can do terrible things with the military might or whatever form of executing power. But if we disconnect it from who's using it for what purpose, then we sort of put our trust in something without really thinking about what to do with it. And you would never just call a hammer a good thing because you can fix a mechanical problem with it if you know that a hammer can also be used to torture people. So the thing as such, no matter if it's tech or something other abstract as a tool, is not good or bad per se. If we generalize it, it is misleading, or it puts faith in something like tech will save us, and then we find out that tech reads what are your trigger points and what drives you nuts and what radicalizes you. And if tech knows more about yourself than you know about you in reading out the big data and what is the pattern and how do you react sensitively on something that other people couldn't care less about, if this is something that makes it extremely difficult to follow this enlightenment story of I have a brain, I use it, causalities will help us to identify the better argument, and that at the end of the day we know the truth. This is much more difficult in times in which we use tech to inform ourselves and to form an opinion. And if this is used with techniques that Lisa shared with us, then it's even more intimidating. So know your limits, think about what tools could do, and cui bono, who benefits from using it in what way, and do not quickly start to put normative labels on things that as such don't really say much. That's more like a warning for what is more to come in our courses. But thank you very much, Lisa, for sharing your expertise.